being from St. Louis, I would always hear about Arthur Ashe because although he was from Richmond, they migrated to St. Louis because African Americans weren't allowed to play tennis where they were from. And so
Right.
Dr. Hudlin, who was in St. Louis, built a court at his house, and Foxworth and Juan Farrell and all of those guys under the talent identification of Arthur Ashe ended up living in St. Louis at that house. My uncle used to go practice with them, and then they played at Sumner High School, and from there they went out on tour. And so when I grew up, I would always hear these stories about these guys, but I didn't resonate with me because I wasn't playing tennis yet. And
Right.
so as I grew up, I would hear the stories about Arthur and about Juan and about Jimmy Connors and everybody. And then Juan became my coach. Arthur was my mentor. And we had that beautiful meeting when I was about 16 years old at the Doral Hotel in New York, where all of the top African-American players met so we would know each other for the rest of our life. And Arthur put that together. And that, for me, probably was the prelude to my philanthropic or altruistic nature by which I went on and start coaching African-American players, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes total sense. We kind of got rolling here, a live start. So I want to make sure we do a proper hello to everyone listening. Welcome back to another edition of the Best of Three podcast. I'm Alvin. We've got Torrey Hawkins here once again, and we are joined by coach, former player, Chris Hill.
Thank you,
out of
guys.
Florida. Chris, we've heard tons of stories about you on this podcast, and it's a pleasure to have you here. I like to say you're a man who needs no introduction, but we're going to go ahead and give you one anyways. And you can stop me or correct me where you want to, but you're time with the racket in your hand, right? Top 10 in the top 10 in both the singles and doubles in college. Did make it to a career high of roughly 450 on the Pro Tour. Finalist at Kalamazoo. Moved on to the kind of the coaching aspect of your career, where I think your imprint has been even greater, right? Obviously, people know who Chris Eubanks is, but they might not know that you're the coach that helped him qualify for his first Grand Slam, right? Currently has two players in the top 100 girls, and then a couple of NCAA champions that you've worked with as well, Jameer Jenkins and Janaea Daniels. So, and I think kind of probably the most impactful, the man that keeps giving generation by generation. You were also mentored and groomed by Arthur Ashe. I didn't tell you this in the beginning, but my son's name is Ashe.
Wow.
His middle name is Ashe. His first name is Torrey after one Torrey Hawkins here. But when he came out, it was a very quick. We can't call him Torrey because he's that's a tough one to carry. But we will call him Ashe, and that is almost 6 years now. So yeah. Anyways. Welcome, sir.
Ashe is a great name.
One little correction. I don't currently have two players in the top 100 girls, but I have had two girls in the top 100 prior to this podcast. So I just want to make sure we tweak that.
Fair. Got it.
Yes.
Got it.
And Chris, that's a great point you mentioned, because there's so many charlatans out there that like to say this, that, and third. We coached a young girl named Jamie Hampton for years, right? And,
yep, I remember.
Mom went through some issues, had cancer, had this, that, and third. Jamie ended up getting a high at 27 in the world, 8 WTA. And for those of us that know that coach players at that level, we're very specific about these things.
Yes.
You know what I mean? We don't want any more credit than we deserve, and we appreciate that the Grand Slam champion at that tournament deserves all the credit. We want what's due. We're not saying, oh, yeah, I coached so-and-so. No, we didn't. I even, when I'm talking about Jermaine, who was, obviously a player that both of us worked with and coached. And you probably had more time with Jameer than I did. I had Jameer at a young age, and I had more time with Jackie toward the end of his career, the oldest brother. And I probably, during the middle years when I had Jermaine and Sco were only a year apart. You know what I mean? So I had a ton of time with Jermaine at many of these tournaments. Jermaine went on to be hitting coach with Serena and Venus for, better part of 10 years. And Robbie Poole, who I know you know very well. And Tim Neely, who I know you worked with from a young age all the way through. It's funny to me how when I'm talking to anybody else, I can tell pretty quickly if they're hyping up or blowing up a little more smoke than they deserve, because it starts to get very vague.
Yes.
They start to get very, oh, I work with all these guys. I work with so and so. I had so and so for like how many years?
It
I
was
can tell you the tournaments, bro. I can
it
tell
was
you
it
the
was it
time
was so
frame.
funny that you say that, because I have a lady, Molly, who you met, that I work with down here,
Sure.
and she was in the hiring process of some coaches, and the one coach was like, "Yeah, I work with all these pro players, and the main one I worked with was Asha Roll." Now, Asha Roll is one of the girls who I told you I got to the top 100, and I'm looking at this guy, and I'm like, "Oh yeah, when did you work with this player?" But yeah, so unfortunately, you have to be humble. And when you spend time out on tour, what you realize is that each week you're going to see the same people, and you need to handle yourself in a certain type of way to have respect, because you're either going to be their hitting party, you're going to be playing against them, you need to play doubles with them. So we learn very quickly when you're at that level that you have to be humble and you can't make things up, and you have to respect the work that other coaches are doing and not try to take credit for it. So that's
I'm going to add to that.
Yeah.
I'm going to see you on that bet and raise you 10.
Sure.
Add to the fact that we are both, all three of us, African Americans. Alvin, you are truly African American, right?
American from
Right.
Africa.
You're right. We are Black Americans by definition. I had my Nigerian Western Civ teacher, Morehouse, point that out to me very, very candidly years ago. You're an African American? I can remember his speech to this day. Being African American, Black American, I feel like the torture stake, so to speak, and I'm a Christian, the torture stake we carry is a little heavier. And I feel like there's a little bit of a extra mile we have to carry that stake a little bit just to even be relevant, let alone to be to get our just due. The term that continues to be a double-edged sword is the term athletic. And the athletic term to me comes as a bit of a, could be a little bit of a left-handed compliment depending on who the player is.
Sure.
And it can be also, it can be a little demeaning as a coach, as if to say,
There's nothing else to it.
athlete, right, the player's a good athlete, you happen to have a good horse and you stumbled into this, as opposed to you coached well and this
Right.
player's pretty good. The same coach of a little lighter pigmentation might get the, oh, genius, he's smarter, they're more mature, they are more,
The IQ is there.
tennis IQ, savvy, right? Where that same coach of a Black coach is credited for spotting, fostering, mentoring, right?
Mhm.
Good athlete.
Right.
And I always found that to be a little bit of a double-edged sword. Chris, what I'm asking you now is I want you to speak to, because I saw it a little bit through the Skull Days and Tim Neely. Help me understand coaching from, let's go from Neely to Eubanks, which I know is a long period of time.
Sure.
Go from Neely to Eubanks perspective.
I'll start with Timmy. I actually met Timmy at the Philadelphia International Grass Court Tournament when I was actually coaching Josh Cohen. Josh Cohen was one of the top players in the world and in the country at the time, and I actually got him his first gold ball there at the grass courts. And there were two African American players at the tournament there that I was watching, and I was like, wow, these guys are pretty good. One was Tim Neely, one was Sloane Stephens. Sloane I think had lost in the first round, but I think she maybe did real well in doubles, because in the juniors she was doing better in doubles than she was in singles. And then Timmy was there with his mother, Queen. And you know Queen very well. And Timothy and Scoville kind of came up the ranks together. And I had a vision at that time when I moved to Philly that I wanted to do something special. My dream was always I wanted to take an African-American player to the Grand Slam level. I didn't know how I was going to do it. I just knew that I wanted to do that because my career got cut short because of finances. I was actually sponsored by Norm Nixon, the basketball player. And in the 1999 or 2000 NBA lockout, I lost my sponsorship. Jalen Rose was very instrumental in helping me at that time. And a year later, I met Timmy. I was the assistant coach at University of Pennsylvania at that time, but I was coaching a lot of juniors, and I had to make a decision. Hey, am I going to continue college coaching, or am I going to work with these juniors? I couldn't do both because it was a conflict of interest. I couldn't be a coach in the NCAAs with
and play
and be coaching those players.
Juniors, yeah.
Right.
Had shout out to Mark Riley, by the way.
Yes, shout out to Mark Riley, Kalamazoo College.
No doubt. Kalamazoo, right. No doubt.
So,
you can come long way back.
Oh yeah. So now here I am with Josh, and Timmy's mom comes over to me, and
I'm sorry, Chris, Alvin, and listeners both. Josh Cohen had junior tennis on lockdown for about 3 to 4 years. There hadn't been a player like him since Robbie Ginepri. You heard it right here. When you played Josh Cohen, you knew it was only a matter of time before he snuck you out.
Yep.
It was one of those players, and I remember the only other player I've seen like him was Ginepri, and I don't put any smoke under Josh. His record and his rankings speak for himself. But Josh was one of those players that he could find a way to beat you on your best day.
Josh was a beast.
He was absolute a beast. And so I want to make context for this, Alvin, just for the viewers to help understand. And this is ironic because we're giving a white Jewish player the love here on
that he deserves.
The level that he deserves,
yeah.
That the level he was. Josh Cohen was, when you heard the name, it was like Whoopi Goldberg and Mufasa in Lion King said, right. Josh Cohen, he played Josh. People are already apologizing to you that you drew Josh Cohen and you draw.
Yep.
One of my first tournaments, Josh Cohen was playing at the Tulsa ITF. And it was like, it was Josh's tournament. Just who was he going to face in what order? That was, just to give everybody a little context, the last time I heard at that level was at the Easter Bowl in Palm Springs when Ginepri was playing.
Mm-hmm.
And it was like, you're playing Ginepri.
Yeah.
Oh, bro. And it was one of those kind of players where his reputation was so good it preceded him. It was just a matter of when he was going to beat you. It wasn't a matter of you could play your best tennis.
He was a great young man.
He was going to beat you 3-1 in the second or third.
Yeah, he was a great young man and a hard worker to the point where, because I was coaching him, Queen Neely, who had the number one 14-year-old in the world, said, I want you to coach my son. And that's kind of how the journey began. And so my vision was there was 3 young men who I thought could work together. And those 3 young men were Tim Neely, Scoville Jenkins, and Donald Young. And these were the guys that were coming up at that time. And me and Torrey would talk at that time, and we were trying to figure out how we could make it work and how we could work together. And that's how we became pretty much big brother and little bro, And so the challenge was this. Here I am, a young African-American coach that doesn't really have a body of work at that point.
Right.
I'm still playing a little bit. I'm still kicking Timothy's butt on the court. And Timothy sees the value. Queen sees the value. There's no money at this point. And now it's like, how do we take that from us having a great relationship as, again, big brother and little brother, to putting this show on the road?
Okay. So
go ahead.
Yeah, help me understand the from the geographical standpoint, right? So you're in Philly, Josh is in Philly, and goes down in Atlanta. Donald was still in Chicago at that time?
Donald was in Chicago.
Okay.
Right.
So even when you guys are thinking about that, how do you guys see that working out?
Right. So I envisioned it as, okay, there was a family in Philadelphia, the Lomax family, which was a great family of doctors and business people. And they had made a big transaction where they sold their business to the government for a large sum of money. They were tennis fanatics. I was introduced to them from Flash from the Hot Five Heartbeats, who also lived in Philadelphia, right? So he saw me at the park in Philadelphia. We practiced at Fairmount Park there in Philly, which is the largest park in the country. And here we are on these 13 courts with cracks in them with grass and weeds growing out the courts. And this is where we're practicing. And so he said, man,
steel nets.
Yeah, steel nets.
And a little fabric on the top for the net strap.
That's where Jewel practiced. That's where Jermaine practiced. That's where Jameer practiced. That's where Timothy practiced. That's where Ashe practiced. So all of those players that came from Atlanta and these different players came up to Philly, and they somehow put their faith in me. And my passion through the spirit of Arthur said, I'm going to make this happen some way, right? So they stayed at my house. My mom cooked food. My mom did Jules' hair. They made sure Timothy was, I slept on the couch. We made all these arrangements to make this dream come true in the spirit of Arthur. And so the Lomax family said, you know what? We're going to sponsor you, okay? And that was the first step. That's when I started talking to Torrey a little bit and say, hey, man, something good is happening here. How do we make it work? But here are the challenges. Geographically, Torrey's in Atlanta, and that's his guy who he's been grooming. Donald is the chosen one coming up behind. They're in Chicago. And how do you convince the parents to trust a 25-year-old brother who has no body of work to put all of this together and also have the acumen to actually teach them the right things to get them to the level that they're all trying to get to? And especially when there's no blueprint of any Black coach besides Torrey that is taking someone to this next level. So now there's, the doubt of the Black coach, young Black coach, being able to take the young Black player to the level since it's never been seen before. And so that's where things start to break down a little bit. So that's one challenge right there, right? The next challenge.
The unsustainability or unprovenness of the young Black coach.
Yes.
And Chris, if I add to that, JTCC, Alvin, opened up around the same time.
Yes.
Okay.
There was a young brother named Philip Simmons.
Yes.
My man, Philly Cheese was coming through, not from Philly, but Phil Simmons was through, and he was from Maryland.
Yes.
And ATCC was opening up down the street from his house, figuratively speaking.
And who was running that at the time was Martin and Rozelle
and my man Roselle Lightfoot. Yes, sir.
Yeah.
So you have all this going on, Alvin, and now they are, in a sense, cornering the market on the Black coaches to kind of make inroads to the top players. I was certainly not a monolith. There was other guys like me out there, and Timmy was the best top up-and-coming 14-year-old going to the 16s and 18s, along with Brendan Evans, Kuznetsov, Nikita Kravonos, and so on. And then you had Philly Cheese, who was he was the first player that I had remembered who skipped plays. And I'm like, you skip national plays. Well, they went off and played the French Open and Wimbledon and had ITF points. And the next year, they won Wimbledon. They won Junior Australian in doubles.
Yeah.
Phil and Scott Alzema. So I'm like,
basically,
we fell behind. I felt like I was behind.
Yeah.
So as the 14-year-old gets the round of 16 clays, and I'm like, man, and we're still behind. You know what I mean? And thinking you have a great tournament here, we were behind. No, sorry, it was 18's clays. He was 16. It was 18's clays. It was 15, I think. 18's clays, and I'm like, this should be There were four under 16s in the 18's clays that reached the quarterfinals.
Yeah. And that's what was going on.
Dennis Zivkovich, remember?
Yeah.
There were four 15-year-olds. Alvin, we were behind the curve even at that point.
Yeah.
Right.
Because here's what happened.
Well, and Chris, I want you to keep going, but I feel like sometimes the viewers have to understand the context of all this, and this goes into the parent's mind of, well, the top kid's doing this. The top kid is signed with Nike. The top kid is over here. What are you doing? Why should I trust you? So this is Queen. This is Go Senior.
Yes.
Their mind looking at me and Chris to say, we like you. You've done great with our kids. Don't get me wrong. But for us to get to the next level, we may need to be looking at somewhere else. That's the undertow that's constantly around you. Go ahead, Chris.
And so what happened was, make sure I mentioned Jameer in that context you just spoke of. And what happened was I had to make a decision. Here I have a good business going on in Philadelphia, and I've got plenty of kids signing up and paying the dues and whatnot. And now I'm getting the pressure from Queen to say, well, I need you to travel with my son full time. And I need you to go to the French Open. I need you to go to Wimbledon, and I need you to go all these places. And I need you right. And I need you to leave all 30 of your clients behind and say goodbye to do so. So when you talk about challenges, now I have to make a decision and say, okay, am I giving up my business to go on the road with this kid? Or am I going to stay put and maybe miss the opportunity, but not only miss the opportunity, but also leave him in a situation where he doesn't have the person around him that he needs around him to actually get to the next level. And lo and behold, what happens? He goes to the French Open. He doesn't behave very well. And now he's the enemy of the state for the USCA. And boom, there you have it. He's no longer.
So did you go with him to that trip, or did you stay home?
I stayed home. I had to, because there was not enough money for me to jeopardize my business. And now that's happened to me maybe 5 times in my career. And so let's go kind of to Eubanks, okay? With Jameer, okay, and then so now we're in this Atlanta thing, right? So now with Jameer, same thing that Scully just said. I mean that Torrey just said. Jameer, we had Jameer playing very well. You know, get into the later rounds in the Orange Bowl and these big tournaments, but he has a decision to make whether he's going to stay with me or go with the USCA. Okay.
So
And
help me understand this though, because Jameer is a South Side Atlanta kid, right? So how does he end up in Philly? Is he coming up kind of on every once in a while, or did he move?
To put everything in context, here's what happened. Jewel Peterson played at USC, made semifinals 2 years in a row. I'm in Atlanta at a tournament with a young lady, Lee Finnegan, who Torrey, you know, because she was friends with Scoville's doubles partner, you know, and Jewel comes to the match and she says, I want you to be my coach. Her dad, Ernie Peterson, rest in peace, was her coach at that point. And so this was a big thing because he's been her coach his whole life. And now she's saying, I want Chris to coach me. So you talk about challenges. This was a big challenge itself because I had respect for Ernie as a father figure and as kind of the godfather of everybody who came out of Atlanta.
Yeah, 100%.
He had a relation.
Norm Wilkerson and Ernie Peterson, both of them, may they rest in peace, were the absolute godfathers.
Yes.
They were in many ways, Alvin, before any of, they were the true NJTL of Black and minority talent before, and talent ID and everything, before it really trickled down to that effect of many of Black kids.
Yeah.
Go, Jermaine,
Jamia,
Natalie Frazier, all these players were with Ernie Peterson back in the day.
Yeah.
And before then, it was Norm. So I say it to say these players were there. I was working with Jewel for a good bit in and out semesters at USC.
Mm-hmm.
And again, I had mentioned to Jewel, look, I'm here. We had just started, Alvin, at RCS around that time. We had a brand new business. We're trying to get things off the ground. Sco was younger, right? Sco was much younger. He wasn't, Jewel was obviously Ernie's daughter. So that was and Jackie, if I'm not mistaken, Chris, Jackie is maybe a tad bit just under Jackie. And then I want to say Jewel came through behind that, and then Jermaine, and then Sco. So it was a few years. So now Sco started at the national scene, but Jewel's in college.
Right.
Jewel she won national indoor. She was a top 5 player, and in space, Jewel's a good player. And so here Ernie is, and this is what I give Ernie a ton of credit for. He's looking out for young Black coaches that can help get his daughter to the next level.
Yep. And
I'm like, talk about body of work. We don't have his body of work now.
No.
We're just younger. We know what we're doing. We know what we're talking about. And he, in a leap of faith, not just his player, his daughter.
Yes.
And he's trusting me, and then of course trusting Chris. Look, get her as good as she can be.
Right.
I trust you. And so that alone took a lot of faith because she had been, in a sense, the jewel, so to speak, of his program.
Yeah.
So these are things that I think people don't always understand. By extension, Jermaine went on to work with you a little bit, went on to work for you, and years passed. Jameer, of course, trained with you and traveled with you a good bit. So
but it all started with Jewel. It all started with Jewel. Because
Ernie was their coach at the beginning.
And you got to realize that, Natalie is like her god sister. And then Jermaine's married to Natalie. So Jermaine's living with me. That's his girlfriend at the time. That's Big Sis.
Now married.
Yeah. She's saying, hey, Chris is doing a good job. You guys should come up. And so they came up. And then Jermaine came up. And then Jameer came up. And then we were getting ready for Orange Bowl and Eddie Her and all these tournaments. And we're playing money tournaments together. They're staying with me, living with me. And it was exactly what I wanted to do. And it was not about money. It was not about fame. It was not about taking credit, because at the end of the day, I didn't make Jermaine, Jameer, Jewel, any of them. They were good when they came to me. So I would never take credit. And then there was Asha Roll, and all of them were coming around at that time. and they were all practicing together. We probably had the best collection of African American players in Philly at one point around the world. And so it was really a special thing for me to be a part of it, and to just be, blessed enough to have worked with those players. And that really trained me as a coach to understand how to coach. I made a lot of mistakes, and then I learned a lot from it. And then, that's actually, believe it or not, how I met Chris, because where's Chris from? Chris from Atlanta.
From Atlanta.
Jermaine's like his big brother. So Jermaine came up to Philadelphia long after all of this we're talking about, and was just coming up to visit. And he visited me at my new club, him and Jameer, and they would always stop by whenever they came into Philly, whether it was, before Jameer was playing qualities of the Open, or whether they just came up there to visit some of the people who had helped them financially along the way. And this last time they said, hey, man, we got this guy who we think, would be a good match for you to work with. You guys play very similar style, and I think you'd be perfect for him. And so insert, Chris Eubanks. And I had kind of gotten out of the loop of the professional type of tennis at that point, because I was running one of the regional training centers for the USCA. So I got more into the political side of running a facility and managing a facility and making sure grants were written and making sure numbers were numbers and meeting with the board. And so it was really like a sort of a shock for me to get asked to work with a pro player, because I was so far out of that loop at that point. But the beautiful thing was, working for the regional training center, I had gotten a lot of professional development to actually be a better coach. It's just that I didn't have any players at that particular moment that I was working with at that level.
Right. Yeah.
One kid, Tawheed Browning, who was a top player in the country.
Boy.
And Lee, who's top 100 right now, came out of that program. Kyle Seelig, who played for Ohio State. Jeremy Casaubon, who just graduated Vanderbilt. So there was a lot of good players in the program, but I had gotten into the management part. And me and Torrey were talking a lot during that time about the different ways to navigate that. And so all of a sudden, Jermaine and them come in, and they're like, hey, bro, we want you to work with our little brother. And I was flattered, and I was like scared, because I had just started a new program at a club and we were making plenty of money. And then going back to, do I go on the road with the player, or do I run the club? So
risk all of the good things that are now in place. And that's the
Chris, biggest challenge.
That's a huge challenge, because your bread's buttered. At the same time, you also know, and you've referenced him several times so far, Arthur Ashe had helped you, right? And so you feel this need to give back. You feel that I would not be where I'm at unless those before me helped me. Right. And so there's this true, we call it altruism, but in reality, let's face it, Chris, there is a loan that has been given you.
Yes.
That the only way to pay this loan back is not through money. You could save up some money and drop $100,000 into a bank account and say, hey, here's what I owe.
Sure.
You know what I mean?
Sure.
But really what it was a chance. It was belief. It was a chance. And you owe that to the next generation. And I remember first working with Jackie. I mean, that was my coaches back home in Wichita, Kansas, told me, Torrey, we don't want your money. You have to go back and find a player to do what we did for you. You have to go back and do for another player.
Yep.
Matter of fact, make it be two players if necessary. But you have to, that is what you owe us. And I'm going to tell you right now, that's more than money.
Yeah.
And so it's something that people don't always understand, that is one of the reasons why I took on Jackie. It's one of the reasons I started with Jermaine. I can remember the day at Sporting Club of Windy Hill, Alvin, when I'm talking to Jermaine Jenkins shooting free throws.
Yep.
And I'm obviously a little bit taller than Jermaine. And I was like, Jermaine, I'm looking at him, looking him up and down. I'm like, Jermaine, you're going to be 6'2" at best. And he's looking at me like, Coach T, I'm dunking on you right now. I go, Jermaine, unlike most of your tennis coaches, I played college ball. I go, you ain't going to be nothing. Yeah. And I dropped a quick little game of 21 on him. I backed him down. I shot him out front. I had a few moves on him. He was like, oh, you played? I go, Jermaine, I played, bro. I go, and I played D2 ball at Morehouse. And he looked at me like, I said, and I'm short for D2.
Right.
You ain't as tall as me. And he looked at me like, I'm a better than you, T. I said, you might be. I said, but if you put that same effort in tennis, you be All-American.
Yep.
And he looked at me. We had shot a few more shots. I dropped him 3 a couple more times out loud. I go, I'm telling you. I go, you have no idea. I said, when I showed up at Duke, when my cousin was playing at Duke, I said I was short. I said, you're shorter than me. Years later, Jermaine Ops, All-American Clemson. And he comes back to me a few later. Remember you told me about that All-American thing? I said, yeah, I remember very well. He says, you were right. I go, yeah, I know I was. I said, but hats off to you for listening to me. I said, that's what I wish somebody told me at 6'6", trying to play basketball.
Right.
And top ball. So I said to say, these are the fun stories, Alvin, that I wish Arthur Ashe were alive to hear and see and know that his legacy continued to spawn. And more importantly, the next generation, the Sco Jenkins, the Jamirs, the Jermaines, Chris, we talked about Nick Monroe earlier, Chris. These are the players that I hope continue that legacy and in their own way. I talk to Jewel every once in a while. She's still doing great, still got the Peterson School of Tennis going strong. These are the pieces that I wish more people would know about and would appreciate, that we each have been helped by those who came before us. We're all standing on their shoulders. And that is one of the things that I have always appreciated. As no one's an island. Everybody has gotten here through somebody and whatnot. So, and I think the one thing maybe, Chris, if you could touch on Eubanks, as you and I both know, came to a pretty close crossroads where he was ready to hang it up a little bit. He was having some success here and there. We knew he was good. We knew he was tall. He had a big serve. We knew his game was okay, but maybe his mindset needed a little bit of a tweak. And I remember you had shown me a video about him after it kind of broke through. And it was funny because you were working at the time and you left him with something after, and he referenced that in one of his big matches after he kind of broke through a little bit. It was well before his round of 16 run at Wemby and all that. And he was talking about how he had to get it was almost word for word what you told him. And I was like, that's what I'm talking about.
What was it? Chris,
Go ahead, Chris.
Well, the relationship between me and Eubanks was challenging. I'm old school. He's new school. And Chris is one of the most intelligent, bright young people that I've ever been around. His impact on me, I'm sure, was just as great as my impact on him. Let me be very clear about that. He taught me as much as I taught him. But the challenge was that, look, Chris has told me stories about how he never even had his own tennis racket until he went to college. His dad was very pragmatic. He wouldn't take him out the state to play until he beat everybody in the city. He wouldn't take he went about this in a very pragmatic way, which I think worked to his advantage because he was always very realistic. But I think it worked I think it was a disadvantage to a certain degree because maybe in his mind's eye didn't see the dream and the potential that we all saw because he was so pragmatic, right? So
or didn't see the exposure. And I saw a little bit of that myself. One of the reasons why he stayed home, and I think that's one reason why he stayed at Tech. And let me just say, add to that. And it's also one of the reasons why he's so humble.
Yes.
Now.
Yes.
Which is why I love his story so much.
Yes. I mean, he's so realistic and humble because of the way he was brought up, and that's what makes him so great. Chris was I feel like with a lot of talented players who have what I call special gifts. Certain players have special gifts. Other players have to work super, super duper hard to be able to accomplish what other players can do at the snap of a finger, i.e. Kyrgios, who doesn't practice for 6 months and comes out and gets to the finals of Wimbledon, i.e. Alicia Parks, who can serve 130 miles per hour and can lose 20 matches in a row and then go win 2 events and beat everybody. Chris is one of those type of athletes that can take the racket out of your hand without any tactics because he's just so powerful with his serve. And then if you look at the stats at Wimbledon, I think it was 317 winners or something like that he had in 5 matches, with the most winners in Wimbledon history, what Agassi had in 7 matches. So it just tells you how explosive and ballistic this guy can be when he's locked in. But the sustainability of that talent without the work that you need to do on a daily basis, day in, day out, I'm seeing that showing up a lot in our players. I'm seeing that show up in Francis. I'm seeing that show up in Chris. Is
Maybe
that
even
bad?
Donald was probably the same story a few years ago.
Is it bad? Is it bad? Is it good? Well, let's talk about their challenges. They're making obscene amount of money in the same in 1 or 2 matches that a guy like Pete Sampras or someone else may have had to play a whole year to make that same amount of money. And I think that that's changing the focus in all sports from it being a mono-focused nuclear laser type of lens. And look, you can get money on Instagram. You can get money with a patch on your shoulder. You can get money. They're making $120,000 in the first round of the Grand Slam. So what I start thinking about is like, well, damn, someone like Naomi Osaka, 21, makes $150 million, and people are complaining, oh, she's not professional. Hey, but look, she's been playing tennis already for 18, 19 years, and that's what people don't realize. She's already been playing tennis since she was 5 years old. So I think their challenge is the distractions, the social media, the amount of money that can be made with the snap of a finger if the right people like you and things of that nature. So I think Chris, to me, represented himself at Wimbledon 2 years ago unbelievably, and we saw what his talent is, but I don't know that he's built to say, I want to do that for the rest of my life and just be grinding like that. And when he has the opportunity to be a commentator and he has the opportunity to do other things that he's really good at. So I think that's their challenge. I don't think Timothy Neely, going back 20 years before that, I don't think he had those type of opportunities and challenges because they weren't present. So different.
Phil Simmons, Skull Jenkins, the same.
Yeah.
But I will say, and it's funny, Mark Riley made a great quote to me one year when I went back to Kalamazoo years after Sko. He took me over to the board. And Mark, if you're listening, you'll remember this conversation. He said, what do you see in this board? And I said, I see a lot of champions. He says, yeah, me too. But I see one black one.
Mm-hmm.
After him, I see 5 black ones.
Mm-hmm.
One of them kicked the lid off.
Mm-hmm.
And we've had Michael Moe, Donald Young twice, Francis. We've had champions since him.
Right.
He says, and you were instrumental in kicking off the first. Yeah. He says, first was all that let everybody believe that they do it. Yeah. And I never got that from Mark. It was a great post-tense compliment, but really on a larger scale, forget me, and obviously in some points forget Sko, it helped kick the lid off. And I think to a large degree, Serena did that for a lot of players.
Yes.
I mean, for a lot of, and we
male and female.
Yeah, let me ask you this, though. When you say it kicked the lid off, but we talked about this earlier, right? That no one outside of their, plus or minus 2 years in their junior career really knows anybody else. So when you say kick the lid off, it sounds like you're saying kick the lid off for more champions, but is it really kick the lid off for those who might think to bring those players along? Like it's maybe more so the coaches than for the players themselves.
But it's the same, is it not? The player may have influenced the coach may have influenced the next player. You sent me a link, Alvin, a year ago before he even started Best of 3, that had Ben Shelton, that had Chris Eubanks, and had Francis Diafo sitting at some diner somewhere, some coffee shop, right? And each of them referenced Sko from back in the day, which tells you they remember, they knew. The ones that know. And that to me is what, they can't appreciate all of them. They can't appreciate, all the players that came before, like we can. We're forgetting names of people that helped us along the way. But I think, to my point, but those that know. And that was the influence. They saw that player playing, to me, and hats off to every player who has come along as a result of some of that same inspiration, all of us. Arthur Ashe, I played with the Arthur Ashe Comp 1 and Comp 2 back in the day. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I started tennis because Arthur Ashe, that won the U.S. Open. You know what I mean? In the 70s. So I look at that to say, I didn't even know why my dad got me involved, but he was inspired by Arthur Ashe. And so here I am years later running an NJTL out of Atlanta that Arthur Ashe started. As I'm doing the research on the NJTLs, I'm realizing how instrumental he was. And so I'm going back, piecing together Horace Reed. I'm at when Martin Blackman took over player development with USTA, and he put a lot of the black coaches together in a room. And I'm meeting Chip Hooper, one of my idols from back in the day. I'm at Chip's table. These are things that I laugh.
I was there with you.
That's right. And I'm like, Chip Hooper. I'm like, bro, for you.
And that is
those are what I'm saying that are just really, you may not know the impact you're having until the person who you've had an impact on rises within the ranks. And I think that's the neat thing to me about impact and about motivation. You never know who you're impacting until that person's impacted to a large degree. So, to kind of, for me anyway, to kind of sum this part up is that, my gauntlet to throw down is for the next generation to continue. They've done great things with the tour. Francis, you've done awesome. I met you at a Clemson back when it was L3 or L2 for whatever tournament it was back then. His girlfriend at the time was playing at Clemson, and we talked for a minute, and I remember talking to him. You and I, Chris, should have been at JTCC. Had things going right. We were both promoted.
I was one step away because I was living in DC right before, because they went from the Washington Tennis Foundation, which was my first job, and then they went to JTCC. And on that note, the two most beautiful things that happened to me in that time period with the time span we're talking about was being the director of Arthur Ashe Youth Tennis and Education, because that was my mentor in Philly. And when Chris qualified for his first Grand Slam, I left from being around him, and I went outside and I cried. Because if you remember, the first thing I said is I want to take an African-American player to a Grand Slam. And when that happened, that was one of the most beautiful moments of my life that I shared with that young man, seeing him achieve his dream, giving back like you're speaking of, and carrying on tradition. Because when I first started coaching, Chris, what did I do, Torrey? I came to Atlanta. I called you guys up. I said, I'm going to need your help. It was me, you, Donald Young, Chris, remember? And my nephew, and we hung out, and I said, I need you guys' love and support to make this mission happen. You were the guys who I consider to be brothers, and we made a pact right there to put our best foot forward, So I think the union that has been formed across the board has been beautiful. And to see these young guys coming up right now and doing their thing, it's the tradition and it's the legacy that we want to have. So it's beautiful.
And I heard Chris tell this story about probably, I don't know, but this is probably before he went to college, but when Donald was on tour, he was taking Chris around with him to be his hitting partner at different events. Like, how did that come about? I mean, I guess geographically, I understand how that came about, but how, from a coach's standpoint, like what kind of impact did that leave on Chris, not only as a player, but like as a person?
Well, I mean, the first practice I ever had with Chris in Atlanta was with Donald Young. It was me, Chris, and Donald Young at what's your old place at Lifetime, I think it was.
Yep.
Or Right Club of the South, which is now Lifetime, correct?
Lifetime, yep.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
And for me, just being with those two young men at that practice and just kind of marveling over just how dynamic and how the game had evolved, and hearing Chris and Donald talk to each other about experiences that they had on the road. But what I think it did for Chris is it prepared him. It was almost like a prerequisite, right?
Yeah.
Course that he took before he went out there. So once he was out there,
apprenticeship almost, in a summer internship, so to speak.
Yeah, he knew how to act, how to walk, which way to go, the whole 9 yards. So by the time Chris was out there, he was already a pro. He already knew everybody. Everybody knew him. He knew how to handle himself. He was dynamic. He was professional. He was confident. And it was a pleasure to just be around that. So I think Donald really prepared him for the opportunity of being on the tour, not alone, he prepared him to see that level all the time. So the big thing that was impressive about me is seeing a guy with a one-hand backhand be able to handle a lefty serve and handle some of the things that Donald was doing, because my little scrubby backhand, that lefty serve and that lefty game would have kind of ate me up. But he was so used to that level because of being with Donald. That was really a blessing for Chris, and it was also just a wonderful, carrying on tradition from Donald to have him even be in that place.
I'll add two little strong caveats. The former number one at Georgia Tech was a guy named Kevin King, who was lefty.
He was at that practice as well.
He was at that practice. Kevin King, a solid lefty, great player. Shout out to Kevin. I saw his wife, Caroline Price, who's actually one of my members' daughters. Mark Price, who played for Tech back in the day. That's Mark Price's daughter, who was a part of the old school Lethal Weapon 3, Alvin.
Mark Price pulled up to my house. My next door neighbor, he was recruiting him at Whitfield Academy.
There you go.
Basketball player. So Mark Price has accidentally pulled in my driveway once, and I was like,
so Mark, I just
Coach,
saw
wrong
Mark
house.
last weekend. Mark and Caroline, they got a little girl. This is how small the world is, right?
Yeah.
So you got Mark, John Sally, Brian Oliver back in that whole situation. That's Caroline, his daughter, worked with De Villiers for years, was an All-American at UNC. Her obviously husband now, and they've got who was obviously he was assistant coach now at Georgia Tech. So that's one side of that. The other side of that is I have to give a big shout out to Jermaine and Jameer, because Jameer acted as a big brother to Chris for a lot of those years, and
does.
Took him on a lot of those trips. Obviously, Jermaine himself with USTA, still doing a lot of things with player development and looking at those players. So to me, and that's really what you always wanted, right? You always wanted those players to continue to help the next one, come up in a world. I feel like in our world today, so many of us have seen we've seen the bad stories. We hear the horror stories. We hear the issues of, this player and that player, not making it, and no one helped. So many of these players know each other. So many of these players have helped the other one. As much as Robbie Poole helped Jermaine get that gig to
get that job. Yeah.
Right. Get that job. He was going to go back to Mississippi. He was assistant coach at Ole Miss where he played. And he helped Jermaine.
Robbie also helped Jameer. Now you know that story, right? So Jameer 100%. Came up to Philadelphia. He took a Series 5 test with Vanguard and missed it by 1 point. And then he's like, okay, you know what? What am I to do now? So he got hired by a family to go to Puerto Rico to be the coach, because this guy wanted to be a Ivy League player, wanted his son to be an Ivy League player. They hired Jameer. They go down to Puerto Rico, start training. Hurricane hits. Boom. Done. Robbie says, I'm leaving. Jameer, you take over with Serena. So Robbie helped both of them get the jobs, okay? And the most beautiful thing, two things, right? Going back to positive, beautiful stories. One, Timothy just called me. He's at Chris's match right now, right? Those two are linked up, and his young son, Timothy's young son, is there watching Eubanks right now play his match because he's starting to play 10, 4 years old. Literally just called me. 2 days ago, I called Jermaine because I'm going to Orlando Magic game with Isu. And Isu was diversity inclusion for USA. And Jermaine's like, hey, man, I'm putting together my bed for my new baby I'm about to have. So he's about to have his second child, a little baby girl, right?
Sure. Yeah.
And whenever those guys get off the phone with me, they say 3 words to me. And you know what those 3 words are? I love you.
Love you.
And that's more of a success, I think, for all of us when we have been through the ups and downs and we've been through the trials and tribulations. And then 5 years ago, I remember Jameer. We're at preseason. It's me, Chris, Jermaine, Jameer, Serena, Coco, Holgaroon, Patrick Muratoglu, and we're in Boca. And Jermaine comes up to me and he says, remember I mentioned about the courts in the park with the weeds in it and grass right there and nowhere. He says, man, how beautiful is this that we came from the park in Philadelphia and now we're at the Grand Slams and we're all together. That for me was, that's the best positive story with all the challenges involved. That to me is just, it brings everything home. You know what I mean? And that can be, you can't make that up. And it all came to fruition in God's divine time.
I think that's probably a really poignant place to stop for today.
Yeah.
Because I think we've got plenty left in the tank.
Yeah.
But I think we can probably do this a few more times. But I think that's a really good place to stop for this particular edition. So we will leave the people, and we'll come back again at it another time. But Chris, I want to thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me, guys. Torrey, my big brother over there, I love you, man.
Brother. And brother from another mother. Yes, sir.
And Alvin, I love you too. Thank you for having me, man. I appreciate it.
Thank you, sir.
I want to just say this one last piece, Alvin, before you sign off. You never know who's in front of you. And you never know the person in front of you and what they've seen and what they've been through before they got to you. And that is just a thought that on perspective for any young player coming up, any coach that's starting to coach now. Maybe you as a player did not get as far as you would like, but you still have years of impact on a player. You don't know what that young player in front of you may get to. Hope that you pray that you meet his expectation and inspire him to go on to do great things. It could be winning level 6. It could be winning Kalamazoo one day. It could be on the Pro Tour one day. It doesn't matter.
Or it could be the CEO of a company.
Could be the CEO of the company that goes on to promote but with the lessons you learned from the sport, right?
Right.
But the bottom line is, at that time, y'all cross paths. You don't know. What you do know is that kid came out to get coached, and you came out to get somebody better. And you, as the young player, maybe it's a parent listening to this podcast, keep your kids around positive people. You don't know what they've been through to get to where they are. You don't know where they're coming from. And they may just be looking for a spark. They may be looking for a kid to pour their energy and their experiences into. And without that kid, how could they, in a sense, work out what they're trying to get to next? And who knows where your kid could go? And I look at a lot of the parents that have blessed me with sharing their kids with me, you know?
We raised a lot of kids.
We've raised a lot of kids. I would say co-raised, right?
Yes.
We've co-parented, we've co-raised. But we've done it with the parents' blessing and opportunity.
Yes.
Some of them have been able to financially give us the opportunity to do what we do. And some have been, some have been more blessed than others, but some have blessed us more than others, right?
Absolutely.
And so it's one of those things where I say, it's just a beautiful thing. And I have to give credit back to your point, Chris. My thought was I wanted to be pro at something. And I said, you know what? Maybe I could be a pro coach one day.
Mm-hmm.
And same thing. When School won Kalamazoo and I'm there when he's playing Roddick, and a few years later he's playing the Doll, and a couple years later he's playing Federer, right? One of my whole thoughts was to go pro at something, and I was able to achieve that dream. And to your point, you cry because 10 years before that you had no idea how you're going to do it, right?
I remember this Nadal match. I remember that.
Oh my goodness!
Last thing, remember, I was going because he was doing this one pattern, and he didn't know he was doing it, and every time he would do, and we tried to get him through. He almost had that match.
He had him, but more importantly, he was at the
match
point.
Yes,
Alvin likes to say he was in the conversation.
Yes, he was.
And that to me is one of the biggest things. We now know Nadal to be Nadal, one of the best of all time.
Yes,
right. We didn't know that in 2005. We had no idea. Right. Sko's gone on to coach other players himself, been a coach himself, and as you said, I'm learning things from Sko years later. Him and Bobby. It's been a pleasure having them on the show because I'm like, that's a good point. And I'm writing down notes of stuff that we share. So I think who will Sko and Bobby yet influence in their next run, right?
Yes.
But Brian Vahaley is now the head of the USTA. What moves will he now make?
Right.
That may impact tennis down the road. Now that he's on the other side of the court, boardroom, and net, right?
Sure.
So now, and we'll see. But the point I'm making is that it's just been a blessing to have been in the conversation, and who knows where that will take us next. But more importantly, that to me, if Arthur were alive to this day, he would have appreciated the sacrifices, the things made, Atlanta, Philly, around the world. He would have been very touched by the legacy, to pardon your old club's name, he would have been impressed that the legacy that he helped set down was continuing, regardless of the facility.
I call it carrying on tradition.
Was carrying on, and we continue to. There's an old expression: each one teach one.
Yes,
right?
yes.
It continued down to this day, and as I said, the gauntlet I throw down is the next generation do more of the same.
And we're still carrying it.
It keeps going.
Yeah, we're still carrying it.
Alvin.
All right.
Thank
With
you,
that,
brother.
yeah, best three.
Thank you, guys.
That's
We're out.
great. Thank you, Chris. We'll talk soon.
All
Part
right.
2 coming up next.
All right, baby.